Do you experience friction with practicing music? Maybe you think you should practice more and feel guilty about it. Or you're a teacher who's frustrated that your students don't practice enough. Now, this is quite common and often attributed to laziness or lack of discipline. But perhaps the root of the problem is putting the wrong frame around the practice. A frame is a set of beliefs that influences how we see the world. They are stories we tell ourselves. Some frames are so deeply ingrained into our culture that we don't realize they exist. For example, if you believe that all politicians are liars, this frame will color how you interpret the news. On the other hand, if you believe politicians from Party X are noble patriots, and politicians from Party Y are lying scumbags, well, your interpretation of the news will be much different. Once we are aware of these frames and how they shape our view of the world, it's possible to exchange them for new frames, and this reframing can have a massive impact in our creative lives. So let's examine our frames around practicing music, and consider alternatives. What does it mean to practice music? In Western cultures, practicing may bring to mind a musician sitting alone in a small room, running through technical exercises, scales, and repertoire. The underlying frame is that practice is not inherently enjoyable, but necessary, like homework or a chore. We say that we play music, but when we're grinding out exercises in a practice room, we can become disconnected from the element of play. Often, students are expected to suck it up, delay gratification, and slog through hours of tedious drills to be rewarded later on with new skills. Discipline and good habits certainly help people develop their skills, but the practice as homework frame has unintended consequences. If you're like most people, once you passed your last math class, you quit doing math homework. So when we put musical practice into this homework category, many students quit practicing when there's no longer external pressure from teachers and parents. And it turns out that willpower, the grit to force ourselves to do something unpleasant, is a scarce resource and not the most effective tool for building a lifelong musical practice. If people were good at willpower, we'd all eat healthy, save for retirement, work out, and practice every day. At least 80% of people fail to stick with their New Year's resolutions for an entire year. And for most people, the promise of future satisfaction alone isn't enough to form a lifelong practice. Instead, let's consider new frames and motivational sources to craft a practice that sticks. The word practice has different meanings for people in various disciplines. For instance, practicing medicine includes seeing patients, research, collaborating with teams, professional development, and much more. There's no separation between the practicing and the real thing. And the same goes for a religious practice. Devout people of faith don't just practice for an hour or two. The practice is embedded into the fabric of their daily lives. Shifting your frame can help you embrace a more holistic view of a musical practice, and this can include skill development along with listening, performing, rehearsing, teaching, connecting with collaborators and audiences, composing, producing, jamming, dreaming up new projects, and drawing inspiration from other disciplines. Now the practice expands beyond a small room and can be part of our identity and how we live our lives. Now think about snowboarders and how they build their skills. When a foot of powder dumps overnight, do snowboarders have to motivate themselves to get out of bed to go practice snowboarding? They may need to draw on their willpower to stay at home. People become great snowboarders not through 10,000 hours of delayed gratification, but through an exhilarating journey. Now, how can we bring this same enthusiasm, adventure, and joy to an artistic practice? One of my mentors, master saxophonist Jerry Bergonzi, gives insight into his integrated practice in an interview with Downbeat. Bergonzi tells us, "I love to practice, and I don't practice to get better. That's my secret. I practice because I like practicing. And people say, 'Do you do yoga?' And I say, 'Yeah, every time I take out my instrument. I get in that zone physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. That's yoga, union. I'm in it. And that's why we all play music. We're addicted to the present tense." Embracing practice in this way creates a virtuous cycle. When practice is intrinsically rewarding, we want to do more of it, and consequently we level up our skills, finding satisfaction in both the process and the results. This can lead to ferocious practicing habits, and in Bergonzi's case, world-class performance. So how can we experience this type of practice, where building new skills is aligned with intrinsically rewarding experiences? It's not something that can be forced, but the good news is that we can set the conditions to be addicted to the present tense. Hungarian-American psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi calls this state flow, when we are deeply immersed in a meaningful activity and hours may pass like minutes. This is also known as being in the zone, where we feel our best and perform our best. Tapping into flow can help us shift from a homework frame to practicing more like a snowboarder. Here are a few actionable strategies to help you tap into flow to develop a practice that's both highly effective and intrinsically rewarding. Indulge curiosity. Let your curiosity guide the direction of your practice, rather than a list of shoulds. Self-directed learning doesn't feel like homework. And in his book Drive, Daniel Pink tells us that autonomy is one of the most important drivers of intrinsic motivation. You won't find flow grinding through something you're not interested in. The skill-challenge ratio. Activities that are too challenging can evoke anxiety, and those that are too easy are boring. Csikszentmihalyi's research tells us that challenges that slightly exceed our abilities channel our attention into the present moment and are enjoyable to work on. So if you find yourself bored or distracted during practice, pivot to a slightly more difficult activity. On the other hand, if you feel overwhelmed or frustrated, shift to a goal that's less challenging in order to hit the sweet spot, which Dan Pink calls Goldilocks tasks. Mindful rituals. Foundational practices like warm-ups often aren't challenging in themselves and leave many musicians feeling bored. Bringing a mindfulness practice to this work can transform repetitive, perhaps thoughtless technical practice from a tedious chore into a centering and relaxing part of your day. An example of aligning mindfulness with practice is during a warm-up, direct all of your attention to a sensory experience, like the physical sensation of your instrument or body vibrating. Or listen deeply to the tone you're creating, listening for harmonics within the spectrum of sound. Or focus on the physical sensations of your breath. And after a mindful warm-up session, you may feel more relaxed and focused and not bored at all. In her book, Deep Listening, composer and visionary Pauline Oliveros reflects on this type of practice. She says, "I started to sing and play long tones, and to listen and observe how these tones affected me mentally and physically. I noticed that I could change my emotional state by concentrating my attention on a tone. I noticed that I could feel my body responding with relaxation or tension. Prolonged practice brought about a heightened state of awareness that gave me a sense of well-being." Connection. Building relationships with like-minded artists and audiences is essential for developing a lifelong practice. And our peak experiences are often transcendent performances and the camaraderie of a tight-knit ensemble. Even as we hone our skills on our own, connections and collaborations inspire us and propel us forward. Belonging to something larger than ourselves gives us a sense of purpose that pushes us through the challenging times. Opening to these frames means embracing practice not as a means to an end, but as a lifelong exploration. In his book Mastery, George Leonard tells us, "The trick here is to walk the fine line between endless, goalless practice and those alluring goals that appear along the way, but the journey is what counts." The magic comes from embracing the process rather than the outcome. Not only do we achieve far greater results this way, we also have the satisfaction of being on a journey worth going on.